Alright, let's dive into this because it's a big moment for Apple, and honestly, for anyone keeping an eye on tech, AI, and global business. Apple just posted its strongest June quarter ever, hitting $109.4 billion in revenue. But here's the thing, it's not just about the numbers. What makes this really interesting is why this happened and what it signals for Apple's future, especially as Tim Cook steps down after 15 years. Personally, I think this quarter is a perfect snapshot of Apple at a crossroads, between Cook's legacy and the challenges ahead in AI, China, and beyond. First, let's talk iPhone sales. A 22% jump? That's massive. But here's what many people don't realize. This isn't just about new features or marketing. It's about Apple's ability to navigate global supply chains, tariffs, and even memory chip price hikes that have been insane lately. We are talking 600% increases in some cases. Cook mentioned they're reinvesting tariff refunds into U.S. manufacturing, which is smart. It's not just about padding profits, it's about positioning Apple for the long game. If you take a step back and think about it, this is classic Apple, quietly building resilience while everyone's focused on the next shiny product. Now, let's get into AI, because this is where things get spicy. Cook's comments on open-source AI were fascinating. He said, "They are useful," which sounds neutral, but in my opinion, it's a strategic dodge. Apple's traditionally been a walled garden, right? But with AI, they're having to play nice with others, like using Google's Gemini for the upcoming Siri update. This raises a deeper question. Can Apple maintain its "we control everything" ethos in a world where AI demands collaboration? Personally, I think they're walking a tightrope here. On one hand, they need to stay competitive. On the other, they don't want to lose their identity. China is another huge piece of this puzzle. Apple's sales there rose 22%, but still missed analyst expectations. What this really suggests is that Apple's not just competing with local brands like Huawei or Xiaomi, they're also navigating geopolitical tensions. Cook's optimism about U.S. China relations feels almost deliberate, like he's trying to keep the waters calm. But let's be real, China's approval of Apple Intelligence after a 2-year delay? That's not just bureaucracy, it's a power play. Apple needs China, but China's also using Apple to signal its own tech ambitions. A detail I find fascinating is how domestic Chinese brands are already adding generative AI features to their phones. Apple's playing catch-up here, which is unusual for them. Speaking of catch-up, let's talk about Cook's legacy. He took over from Steve Jobs in 2011, and since then, Apple's market value has increased by over 1,000%. That's insane. But here's the thing, Jobs was a visionary, and Cook was an operator. He scaled Apple into a trillion-dollar company, but now the game's changing. AI, memory chip costs, geopolitical competition, these are problems that require a different kind of leadership. John Ternus, the new CEO, is a hardware guy. Personally, I think that's a safe choice, but is it the right one for an AI-driven future? This is where Apple's at, a company that's never been bigger, but also never faced more uncertainty. One thing that immediately stands out is how Cook's handling memory chip costs. They raised prices on Macs and iPads by up to $300, and yet, the lower-priced MacBook Neo was their bestseller. What does that tell us? Apple's still got brand loyalty, but they're also feeling the pressure to balance premium pricing with accessibility. In my opinion, this is a test for Ternus. Can he keep Apple's margins high while also making products people feel they can afford? Finally, let's zoom out. Apple's not just a tech company, it's a cultural force. Cook's tenure saw Apple become the world's most valuable company, but it also saw them face scrutiny over privacy, labor practices, and their environmental impact. When asked how he wants to be remembered, Cook said, "It's been a privilege." That humility is, well, very Apple. But here's my takeaway, Apple's next chapter isn't just about products or profits. It's about whether they can stay relevant in a world where tech, politics, and ethics are colliding like never before. So, what do you think? Is Apple poised for another decade of dominance, or are they facing challenges they can't outmaneuver? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more to unpack here, and I'm just getting started.